Will 2025 finally be the year that Ole Miss, you know, becomes that elite team in the SEC? Is this finally the year? Steven Willis of Locked On Ole Miss is here. Let's start right there, Steven. Do they have the roster to do it? Like, is this finally the year, or are we back to tempered expectations, middle of the pack, 8 to 9 wins? That's all good and fine for Ole Miss.
The roster at Ole Miss is not as good as the one that was in 2024. Obviously, just look at the NFL Combine statistics. I mean, that's not exactly breaking news, but this roster is still probably a top 3 roster in the history of Ole Miss if the 2024 one was there. The problem that they have is the experience factor. Whenever you're breaking in a new quarterback in Austin Simmons, which everybody loves, everybody is so hyped out about Austin Simmons and what he can do at the quarterback position, but the experience just isn't there. So there's a little bit of an element of wait and see, but it's not going to be a situation to where you're going back to, 2008 Ole Miss, to where you're just hoping to be good and get into the conversation, or even before them when you just want it to be anywhere near the conversation. I think this Ole Miss team is squarely in the conversation. If you look at their schedule, I can see them being favored in 11 games that they play. I could, at a minimum, 10. And if you win 10 games, you go to the college football playoff. So this Ole Miss football team can absolutely make the playoff.
They don't have Alabama on the schedule. They don't have Tennessee on the schedule. Those are certainly benefits for Ole Miss, but I'm not as bullish on the schedule. Let's save our Simmons talk and just dive right into that, because you and I don't see this schedule the same way. Now, most of the difficult games do come at home in Oxford, but Ole Miss has not been infallible on their home field the last couple of years. You have to, of course, avoid, the Kentucky level upset here, but you've got Florida, South Carolina, a random game against Washington State, LSU, and Arkansas all coming to town this year. And yeah, you'd rather play those games at home. But as far as SEC schedules go, Steven, I don't exactly look at this as, what Missouri had last year or what Texas had last year, even, where you go, I only see a really couple tough games there, because Florida, of course, beat Ole Miss a year ago. Granted, it was in the swamp, but I think they're going to be pretty good. South Carolina is, I think, going to be a really good team again. Now, Ole Miss took care of them last year. I'm fully aware. But I just don't see that many breaks. I don't see a lot of stretches where I think, Ole Miss is going, 3-0 in that stretch, no questions asked, and it won't be a problem.
Well, as fans, everybody wants guarantees, but I genuinely think this is a better schedule in 2025 than what they had in 2024. In 2024, they played 4 cupcakes at the beginning before Kentucky, completely not ready to play a conference level game, and that jumped up and bit them. The LSU game in Tiger Stadium, night game in Tiger Stadium, that's difficult, but Ole Miss was by far the superior team that night. I do not care what anybody says, but losing a game in overtime, that's a little bit excusable as well. And losing a game in the swamp, even though it was inexcusable and Ole Miss absolutely had to have that game, I don't know that it is something that could be repeated necessarily. Getting Florida and Oxford, getting South Carolina and Oxford. And by the way, in that South Carolina game, if you'd have played 8 quarters, South Carolina would not have scored a touchdown in that game. So you have a situation. I'm not necessarily worried about South Carolina. I'm not necessarily obviously worried about Kentucky or Arkansas and what's going on. And LSU and Oxford's always a different animal than LSU and Baton Rouge in the history of this series. The hardest games on this schedule are the 2 road games that are going to happen. At Georgia, which that's the one game on the schedule that you would put on and just straight L and just see what we can do from there. And Oklahoma, which they're going to be better. I don't know how much better they're going to be in that situation. If Ole Miss can pull that game out to where you have a margin for error game in Oxford, all of a sudden 10 wins becomes a very real probability. Now, Washington State changed their coach. They lost their quarterback. Now, their head coach is the guy that's coming from South Dakota State, so they're going to be well coached, but it's a transition year, and the schedule is broken up really nicely in the fact that you start out with Georgia State, then you have Kentucky and Arkansas, which is going to be an SEC game, and all weird stuff can happen, but you would rather those two than others. Then you have the Tulane and the LSU and Oxford. Then the really hard games against Georgia and Oklahoma hit. Then you have the South Carolina and Florida thing with sandwiched with the Citadel in the middle, and then you have the Egg Bowl at the end. I actually really, really like this schedule as far as being good enough that it's going to threaten Ole Miss. I think that Ole Miss is at its worst when it's not threatened. Whenever they do not have to worry about it, they are the world's worst of looking over opponents, whether you want to call it that or not. This schedule is going to make it to where you can't necessarily do this. This is going to require a good bit of focus, but you still should be favored in most of the games.
I agree they'll be favored in most of the games. I'm curious to see what happens with Oklahoma. They bring in, speaking of Washington State, John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle from up in Pullman. The offense should be significantly improved. Their defense was really good this past year, but that's the second week of, you hear this in the NBA a lot, second week of a back-to-back. You've got back-to-back road games in the SEC. That's not a supremely common feat. Usually if you play 2 in a row away from home, you've got a bye sandwiched in between. But the interesting thing for Ole Miss, and Washington State, by the way, Steven, if you didn't know, has 57 new players coming in for 2025. 16 of them from South Dakota State making their way to Pullman. I'm interested to see what that looks like. I don't expect the Cougars to be able to pull that upset in Jimmy Rogers' first year. But you have the LSU game at home. That's not going to be easy with Garrett Nussmeier, their veteran quarterback, against an inexperienced one in Austin Simmons, who we'll talk about in a moment. Then you go on the bye before you get Washington State. You could even see that as a scheduling break because you kind of get a get right, tune up, get back into the swing of things off the bye opportunity against Wazoo at home before you go at Georgia and Oklahoma. But Georgia, Oklahoma, South Carolina, there's at least one loss in there, and I'd pick 0-3 before I pick 3. I'm not saying I'm picking 0-3 there. I'm just saying I would see them going 0-3 in that stretch before I saw them going 3-0. And
I don't think they're losing to South Carolina. If the South Carolina that I saw is any indication, I mean, Lenore Sellers is a good quarterback, but if you take away his legs, they are not a threatening team. That's all that Illinois did, was just to make it to where he could not beat him with his legs. It's like throw the ball to beat us. And Pete Golding is a master at that. I'm worried about Florida more than South Carolina, and then the 2 road games. So those are the 3 games that are really on my radar at the moment.
by the way, I just want to make sure that I have put this thought in your head now so it can manifest over the next, half a year or so as we wait for college football to come back. Don't sleep on Mississippi State. They are going to beat somebody in 2025 that nobody thinks they should. I have had that take for a while. I don't know that it's going to be Ole Miss, but there's going to be a game. Mississippi State will beat someone that you look up and go, wait, they beat who? They're doing what now? How did that happen? And everyone's going to be pondering how that happened. And I won't be surprised by it. But
you want the prediction? I'll tell you which game it's going to be.
Hit me with it.
They're going to beat Tennessee.
Oh, there it is. Bang.
Mm-hmm.
Arkansas did it last year. I think Jeff Levy could be pretty darn good. But that's what Ole Miss feels about Austin Simmons as well at quarterback. What has the Rebels so excited about what he can be, replacing Jaxson Dart, who I think we all realize was really, really good.
Yeah, they're different type quarterbacks. I tell people all the time on my show that Austin Simmons is the closest thing they've had to Eli Manning in Oxford, Mississippi. His processing ability is completely off the charts. If you just look at the limited number of throws that Austin Simmons had over the course of the season, look how quick he processes. Look how quickly the ball got out of his hands. Everybody likes to make the Tua jokes because he wears number 13 and he's left-handed, but he's 6'4". He runs a 4.5 40. He processes at a super high rate. You saw against Georgia just what he could be turned loose with doing. Now imagine a situation to where the offense and the game plan is tailored around this player towards his strengths. I think we have a situation to where he could put up 3,500 yards in his first year. And everybody's like, what is going on? We were thinking about Nico and DJ Lagway and Arch Manning and all those guys. Who is this Austin Simmons guy? I think Austin Simmons legitimately could be a top half of the SEC quarterback next year as a first-year starter. In his second year at Ole Miss, he might be the best quarterback in the league.